My name is Nafisa Alya Cameliya, so I want to answer the questions number 2. I thought the final exam would be the usual format, but instead we were asked to create our own questions. So my first reaction was shock and confusion about how to make a good questions. However, after it was explained, I became interested because this was a new experience for me. Creating questions felt more difficult since it required understanding the material thoroughly, not just memorizing answers. Although I was somewhat worried, I eventually became interested in this assignment. Next, when I first found out that the final exam involved creating my own questions, I felt a mix of confusion and challenge. I was confused because this was different from usual, where I only needed to answer questions, not design good ones aligned with the material. I wondered whether my questions were appropriate enough to measure others' understanding. On the other hand, I felt challenged because this test required a deeper understanding of the concept, learning objective, and difficulty level. To next question. At first, I felt quite confused because I was used to answering questions, not creating them. I had to think like a lecturer, determining important material and forming suitable questions. However, I also felt challenged because creating questions on conditional sentence and direct and indirect speech required me to truly understand the material first. This experience helped me understand the material better from a different perspective. For the next question, the biggest challenge was finding a scenario or context that was suitable and easy to understand, yet still related to the material. I had to create questions close to everyday life so they wouldn't be confusing, while still being able to test understanding of conditional sentence or indirect speech, not just reading comprehension. Next, I started by choosing the material to be tested and determining the purpose of the question. Then I created a situation related to daily life so the question would be easier to understand. For the answer key, I rechecked the grammar rules used, such as conditional sentences, pattern, or tense change in indirect speech. Before finishing, I tried answering the question myself to make sure it was clear. So the next question. Yes, this process made me realize that understanding grammar rules alone is not enough. I had to know when and how those rules apply in different contexts. I also became more attentive to small details such as tenses change in indirect speech and the difference between each type of conditional sentence, which I often overlooked before. For the next question, textbook exercises are more helpful for practicing grammar rules that have already been learned. Meanwhile, creating contextual questions requires deeper understanding because I had to think about the concept, context, and correct answer. When practicing, I act as a user of the material, but when creating questions, I have to think as the question creator, making me more active in understanding grammar thoroughly. Next, I would rate myself in 8 out of 10. I understand conditional sentence and indirect speech well enough to create my own question and answer, but I still need to be more careful with certain grammar rules, especially tense change in indirect speech, which sometimes still confuse me. Next, while writing this self-evaluation, I reflected on the whole process. from understanding the material to creating questions and answers, then considered what I had mastered and what still needed improvement. Assessing myself is quite difficult because I need to be honest and objective, but this reflection helped me recognize my strengths and weaknesses for further learning. The next question. The reflection section is important because it helps students realize what they already understand and what still needs to be learned, focusing not only on the final result but also on the learning process. Reflections also increases self-awareness and helps find better ways to learn in the future. So the last question. When working on questions made by the lecturer, I focus on understanding the question and finding the correct answer based on grammar rules I've learned, mainly applying existing concepts. In contrast, when creating my own contextual questions, I had to think more deeply, determining the context, purpose, difficulty level, and the grammar rules being tested. This made me view the material from a different angle as a question creator, not just a respondent. This experience also changed how I see the function of grammar in real communication. Previously, I often saw grammar as a set of rules to memorize for answering questions. However, through this test, I realized that grammar actually plays an important role in conveying meaning clearly and accurately in everyday situations. By creating context close to personal experiences, such as saving money instead of buying skincare or making plans with a friend, I could see how conditional sentence and direct and indirect speech are used in real communication. Therefore, grammar is no longer just theory, but also a tool for communicating effectively. Thank you. That's all for me. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.